This book was so awesome, huh?
It's an incredible work of journalism.
It's
It's
a little
it's
hard to be like rah about
yeah,
like
right?
getting a baseball team or I don't know, like Frankie just was like threaded like, "Oh, Sacramento's such a baseball town." Because I guess they had some exhibition game today of the River Cats and the Giants, I guess.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh shit, they're making us like a target city."
We've been the target city
Yeah,
for the past few months
yeah,
because the A's the A's need a temporary spot, right?
right.
So there's this talk about having Sacramento be the location for a few years.
Yeah, which
And
is sketchy. But
yeah,
I mean,
I was
theoretically, they would just use the Sutter Health field or
they won't
whatever.
build
But
anything here, but
I think it would be like not necessarily like the A's would move here, but that it would be like testing us out for other teams kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah. And I'm sure we'll be a spot in the future because we
Yeah,
had all those MLS like expansion efforts, right?
yes,
So
totally.
so almost guaranteed, I'm sure we'll be roped in somehow.
I was gonna like I just didn't really have time to like do all this research I wanted to do on like I went and looked up how Golden One was funded, which was through bonds. And then since the pandemic, the parking part of what's supposed to pay for the bonds is parking,
Yeah.
and the parking revenues have just cratered. I
Uh-huh.
mean, now they're coming back, but since the pandemic, so they had to take a bunch of money out of the general fund to pay off the bonds during the pandemic because the parking revenue wasn't coming in, which I guess the Neil DeMause or whatever said that that was expected to happen anyways. There was no way the parking revenue could have kept up with the bond um, payments,
Uh-huh.
regardless.
Yeah.
So I thought
I
that was
mean,
kind of
these
interesting.
numbers are so, extraordinary because they keep on creature like you keep on adding stuff, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, and like I mean, it's just crazy how I think the two arenas that I know of that they're talking about in the NBA right now, which there's probably more, but is the Dallas one where they're talking about somehow having um
The Dallas stuff is weird. They want to make this whole new. I mean, remember, there's a whole chapter about how the teams want to start making these like entertainment hubs,
yeah,
and Dallas is very explicit with theirs. Like they want to build a new casino and they want to have this new arena. Like there's this
yeah,
whole entertainment hub.
yeah, exactly. So how did I mean there hasn't been anything specific enough to come out on that about how they intend to fund that.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting conundrum because can you even have public, funds fund a gambling facility? Like,
Well, but there was a lot of, I mean, in the later chapters, there's a lot of talks about these, how even if it's like privately funded, they still figure out ways to get the cities to pay for it, right?
yeah,
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 so all the like land and all the,
the
infrastructure stuff,
facilities,
the
yeah,
facilities.
yeah, totally. Um, yeah, what a scam. I mean, and kind of like, I mean, I think in the macro too, it's like this is how our tax money is getting spent. Like,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
not just about sports either. I think there was the element of just urban planning and urban development being
yeah.
a scam, really, like in a lot of ways. I mean, unless it's just straight infrastructure. And even like you said, when you look at like the infrastructure that is being built to support private enterprise, like I think you have to really examine that as well.
Corporate welfare is is way more common than you'd think.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest, like I'm in tech, right? So In particular, I'm in semiconductors. There was this huge act called the CHIPS Act.
Yeah.
That was it was basically, a bunch of money just gifted to these chip companies to build factories here.
Yeah.
But none of the plans are like real and good, right? They're cooking numbers to get that money from the government, basically,
I kind of
especially
want to
Intel.
read he mentions this other book in here called Job Scams,
Yeah.
which I can't remember. I think I think the guy's name is Leroy or something. Let's see. But yeah, I was mildly interested. I downloaded it. Job Scams book. He mentions the Leroy guy a ton. Yeah. The Great American Job Scam. Greg Leroy. Yeah, I mean, I just it's just disturbing. I guess I'm a progressive politically.
Mhm.
But it's hard to argue that, you know, that all of this tax money should go to the government at all when it's just being spent in such a profligate kind of way. It's just freaking insane.
The part that hurt me the most, like that was like really crazy to me, was when we're talking about public referendums, right?
Yeah.
And how just swarming the community with misinformation
Yeah.
like led to them getting their money, right? And it's like, even if we the people are the ones who are deciding like where the money goes, it's still gonna get scammed somehow,
Yeah.
because people can just lie to us, and people will accept the lies as truth.
Well, and not just that, but the people who have the money will always have the power as long as there's this element of like slick advertising involved in any of these things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because like the whole thing in Seattle, the whole thing in Miami, the whole thing where they basically, I mean, bought elections for one thing, literally
Mhm.
in the Seattle case where he literally paid for the election to happen, but it's such a great return on your investment, right?
Yeah.
So you shell out $4 million to fund the entire election, and look what you get back, this massive windfall of just killer revenue that's been entirely publicly subsidized. Like, it's insane. And then not to mention that you can launch all these completely slick ad campaigns for whatever it is, like, if it's going to be some kind of entertainment center, and it's going to be, whatever it's going to be, condos. But I thought they did such a good job too of like talking about what's being displaced, right?
Uh-huh.
So like, okay, cool, you want to like come in and build, condo entertainment super structure with the arena in it or whatever, or the ballpark or the Coliseum.
Yeah.
But what about the people who already live there?
Yeah.
And you're building condos that they won't even be able to afford. So it's just such a you're taxing them, and if it's not a direct tax, oftentimes it's like a lottery or a sin tax or
Yeah. Yeah,
whatever,
that's it's crazy how all the way they tax these almost always is a very regressive tax.
Yeah.
It's always punishing the most poor in our society to benefit like a super rich guy.
Well, and then giving them absolutely nothing on their
Yeah.
return.
Mhm.
Like, not even good schools. Like, that is the
Yeah.
most
Yeah.
basic thing you could do, and not even and infringing on even things like affordable housing, in an urban setting. And I mean, I just yeah, it was really made me angry, actually.
Yeah, it was a hard read,
It was.
especially like early on, because it's demoralizing, right?
It is. It is.
It there's so many ways that the teams screw the cities and people over,
Yeah.
and I was following this. Like, I before I read this book, I was aware that these new stadiums were a scam, but
Right.
I was not aware of how insidious the scam was, and
Well,
like
and it's
how
to what
crazy.
extent? I think the thing that like got me over everything else was when they started going through like all the revenue streams that these like the naming rights, the luxury boxes, the tickets, the concessions, the parking in some cases, all of
Mhm.
these things go directly into the owner's pocket.
Yeah.
So what and then in a lot of the cases the lease is forgiven. The I took notes of it all, but my notes are like they're too detailed and I
Yeah.
don't know if I even want to really necessarily use them because I don't want to get lost in them, but like I
We can
just
go through them at some point.
yeah. I
You
mean,
know, one thing about the stadiums is I watched a video before we started reading this book about how like stadiums that after teams leave are almost always way more profitable, right? Because
right.
stadiums are inherently a pretty profitable business. Like if you're selling all this tickets and the revenue, even if, like for concerts and stuff, that's a lot of money. So
Yeah.
like after the Warriors moved over to San Francisco, the Oracle Arena, well, I guess it's Oakland Alameda Arena or something like that.
Right.
The Oakland Arena is so much more profitable now.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, all the more reason why they don't care if the A's stay, right? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it's insane. I don't know. Like I said, I wanted to kind of look up what the Kings um like lease agreement with Golden One was and stuff. That was the other thing is somebody on my threads who's a Wizards fan had put
Yeah.
up because the Wizards there was that big thing where they were talking about, oh, the Wizards are going to move out of DC and go to Virginia, right?
Uh-huh.
If and it was another one where there was like some kind of casino backdrop of some sort, betting money, which is like the new crypto right now.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and he was saying that the way that it currently stands is that their lease, their 30-year loan they took out on those municipal bonds won't be up until like 2044.
Yeah.
So,
The city announced like and I think it got some Woj tweet or something like that.
oh
They can't
really?
leave. Yeah, they can't leave until like 2047 or something like that.
Good. I hope they hold them to that. I mean, although, I mean, now from what you're saying, maybe it would be better for them to just have concerts and shit in there, depending on what the team's lease looks like, right? And
Yeah,
what
yeah, it's
their
all
revenue
dependent on
stream.
how much the agreement is and how badly they screwed over the team.
Yeah, I guess like
I mean the
what
city.
freaks me out or what trips me out is like, do they not have people who are crunching the numbers
No, but
on?
it's so good for the political, like for the politics. It's so good for the politician to say, "Yeah, we got this agreement done with the team." It's
Yeah,
all short-term thinking.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. I
So
mean,
so
I guess maybe I mean, and it was good that he summed up with like the Fenway stuff and how to win a battle and like
yeah.
how to get your plan out first and all that kind of stuff was I think really interesting and useful.
Mhm.
But it's like such a it's like such an emotional argument on one side, like, oh, I love the team, I'm a fan of the team, is a totally different vibe than this does not make financial sense for our city to have a team,
Yeah,
like
and it's like not funding our schools is perpetuating inequalities in our society. No one talks about it like
yeah,
that, right? It, it's
yeah,
it's always it's always you get this like we're voting for the stadium. It's never, the argument's never phrased in terms of like, you know, the opportunity cost. Like, this is continuing the problems with our city. This like our budget deficits are you know, like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stupid deals that come out of budget deficits.
Well, and
One,
I look at like a couple of the cities that, I mean, I don't go to other places very often, so,
yeah,
don't quote me, but I mean, LA, San Francisco, Sacramento, like we all have teams, we all have these arenas that are not paid off yet or that,
yeah,
are brand new, and we all have this tremendous homelessness problem. Like,
yeah,
I mean, and I know there was some stuff in the Golden One, um, I don't know what you call it, plans or whatever, that had talked about implementing affordable housing and stuff like that. But none of that stuff has ever come to fruition.
mm-hmm.
So it's like, and I think they sort of talk about it in here as like once the main project with the venue goes way over budget, all the other shit falls to the wayside, right?
Yeah,
Like, oh, we can't afford to do the affordable housing anymore because we ran over by $500 million. Like,
yeah, yeah.
oopsies.
The part about their book cooking,
Yes.
like I fundamentally understood this because remember we read through the book with the players unions, right?
Yeah.
So they deeply talked about how fake the books are, how
Yeah.
fake the numbers are, and how that was like actually getting in the way of real negotiations.
Yes.
But we're seeing why, right? Like, this
Yeah.
is why.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because in certain situations like that, it's like they totally probably could have afforded it, but things went out of budget and they cooked their books to make it look way worse than it is, so they didn't have to spend the money.
Well, and I think the stuff that they talked about, how like the baseball stuff, especially, which I'm not a big baseball fan, don't know much about the league and all that
Yeah,
stuff, but
same.
obviously, like, I think you'd have to be like under a rock to not know like how much Shohei Ohtani made, or
Yeah,
you know, like, and I think the stuff that we're talking about with the like writing players' salaries off as a degrading asset was
yeah,
really
that's
interesting.
wild.
And then they talk at one point, there's like a whole chapter where it goes through like why can't teams be publicly owned? And it was essentially just that, like that nobody wants to show their books, right?
Yeah,
And it's not that the owners individually don't, it's that the league won't allow it, right?
mhm.
Because it undermines the sweet deal for everybody else, essentially. Yeah. Well, tell me, I guess, like, I mean, we can go through these, like I could try and go through them quick. But like I said, they're just really detailed. I guess, like, I would like to know more too. There was a couple, like the Indianapolis stuff I thought was interesting, because Indianapolis was like one of those cities where it was like build it and they will come kind of thing. Like
Yeah,
they didn't have the football team or I think a baseball team, but they just built the facilities.
yeah. There's a few
And
cities like that. OKC is the basketball example, right?
yes, right. So, I mean, I'm curious, like, if there's any, you know, positive sort of financial information, um, from those kind of deals.
I mean, St. Louis got hosed, right?
Why
Like
did
they
why did
they
St. Louis? Oh, because they lost their team. I didn't.
yeah, they built it like this extravagant building, and then they had the team for 10 years.
Yeah, yeah, right.
And football arenas are very hard to use.
Yeah,
Like, it's
yeah,
basketball is different, right? Because you can have a lot of concerts and events at basketball stadiums.
true.
Hockey, it's a lot more multi-purpose.
And I guess that the Expos stadium as well, you could say, was
Yeah.
turned into just a boondoggle, like where they lost the team.
Well, but the Expos is a little different because that used to be the Olympic Stadium.
Right.
So the Expos weren't fleeced by the MLB. They kind of screwed themselves over.
Yeah, true.
And that's one thing that surprised me is how often cities screw themselves over. The DC situation in the book was super surprising to me. Like, they had all the leverage
Yeah,
and they didn't use it at all.
and they still couldn't figure out how to. It's crazy, but I thought that the chapter on Detroit was
Yeah, that
fascinating
was
because
fascinating.
I thought that that was such a good microcosm of like how these things have worked like this for years and years and years and years, and how
Mhm.
it's not just the sports owners, but it's these developers that have these relationships, with the politicians who are
Yeah.
getting these weird handouts that are sometimes like in the form of just land or great deals on land or just no bid contracts. Um, and then the part about the Henry Ford stuff where it was just like where Henry Ford just kept getting these subsidies to like have jobs, and they were totally like they would build something and then bail out on it and then build something else and then bail out on it just like as soon as they got whatever subsidies. So this is
Yeah.
like the American way. I mean,
Yeah.
starting back from even the inception of cars basically there's like this idea that it's like a trickle down thing, right? Oh, you're
Yeah.
creating jobs, like you're the good guy, like let's help you be the good capitalist. And it's like, but that's the only money there is in some cases.
Mhm.
Or they're just pocketing all of this revenue without even putting it back into
I was
the
really mad a few years ago. Well, about internet, um, because the federal government gave AT&T a ton of money to improve the internet infrastructure and get broadband internet. So what
oh
AT&T
my
did was lobby the FCC to lower the standards of broadband internet.
yeah,
They said, "Oh, we have broadband now," and they pocketed all that money.
yeah. I
Like,
could tell you a story about trying to get internet through AT&T and get it like updated as per the government's new protocol in the last like 2 years. But it was such a fucking nightmare. Like they could not figure out how to get to our house. They couldn't figure out they didn't they've dug up our entire cul-de-sac. Like it took weeks for them to dig
mm,
up our whole cul-de-sac. And by the end of that, they didn't even have a hookup outside of our house. So
wow.
they had to come through our backyard, which is, I don't know, like half an acre or something, from the neighbor's power pole, who
Wow.
our neighbor's not like a sympathetic, fuzzy, warm person. Like it was the biggest pain in the ass. And then by the time we actually got it, it was like twice as much money. It
Yeah.
was just like, and it was like, what the hell? We know you guys got money from the government to supposedly make the service better, right?
Yeah.
And more accessible. And it was just a nightmare. So there you go. Corporations are people too, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, this stuff is way more evasive than you'd think. And I feel like Field of Schemes like connected the dots for me.
yeah,
Because I understand this all in isolation,
yeah,
but Field of Schemes finally let me see it in like a general broad picture.
yeah.
Just because of how pervasive, consistent, and that's how government works. It's
Yeah,
short-sighted.
it's all a cheat. You got to be able to cheat, and it's like I feel like I've been doing life wrong this whole time. Of
Yeah,
just. I mean, it dovetails with so many things. I think in society right now too, like obviously Donald Trump, and who is basically was never a billionaire. He just
yeah, yeah,
lied,
yeah. They
and
just
they
lied,
gave
and
him a
and it's
lot of
okay.
money.
And it works.
Yes. I mean, it's just so freaking crazy, the world that we live in and the country that we live in, and it's so fucked up. And there was this big thing the other day on Threads about how, like, oh, stop being mean about Biden because he's the most progressive president we've ever had. And it's like, okay, yes, he's done like 4 really cool things that were on the progressive, desire list.
Yeah.
But look at all the other shit he's done and tell me how much money he has taken from private enterprise and moved into millionaires' pockets. Like wars. There's just so many. It's just, this is the tide, and the way that the ocean is built is for these waves of cash to just literally like break on the beach of millionaires and billionaires, and
Yeah.
reversing it is going to be so difficult if anyone ever even tries, right?
Yeah.
And why
Yeah.
would they? Because the entirety of the influencer population is those people with that money in their pockets who can pay to influence.
Yeah. There was a chapter about the journalism stuff, right? How
Yes.
how how even the journalists never talk about this stuff
Yeah.
because the people who own the newspapers and web and news sites and TV news, they're all these millionaires. So you're never going to be able to convince the public about this because all the no journalist will talk about it, and that's a great way to get fired if you wanted to talk about it.
I put this in my thread right here, the fear and favor in the newsroom.
Yeah.
Um yeah, that was a site that that was, yeah, a site that he cited, and it's basically journalists talking about how they're scared, to keep their jobs, like,
It's
uh
really bad right now.
and who they're beholden to. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not just that, but I mean, you look around, like, even especially look around the sports, um, you know, journalistic community in
Yeah.
Sacramento specifically. Like, we've been losing story writers for several years now, right? I
But
mean,
none of them are on the. I mean, there's like one guy on SACB, right? Like all these big news sources, and nowadays they've
I guess
fired
there's
everyone.
technically two, because there's Chris Biederman and Jason Anderson.
Yeah.
But I don't think Jason Anderson, I don't know how it all works. So there's two on SAC-B, but there used to be like 4 people
Yeah.
in Boogie era, Um, and there's like the 1140 guys, and then there's the 1320 guys.
Yeah.
Technically, probably like James is the only journalist, though.
Mhm.
Um, and then 1140 has Brendan and Frankie, who are writers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and they can't. I think, like, I've seen people like accuse them of being shills, and
Yeah, but
and
that's
I
how they
know
keep
they're not,
access.
but they can't be too critical either, right? Or their credential won't get renewed. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm not saying that they should, go out and like spread a bunch of like weird shit around or anything like that either.
Yeah.
But
I mean, some Ham kind of did at some point, right? Like there was the whole weird like post interview talk about like De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis and how the team leaders never went to the post interviews.
oh,
That was something
was that
Ham was
this
kind of
season?
pushing this season.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
they
I don't.
do that stuff to some extent, but like I don't think there's that much to be negative about right now.
Right.
Outside of like, so this will be a concern later on. I think our media is pretty good at being negative when they
Yes,
need to.
absolutely.
Um,
But I mean, it's already a constricting world, is I guess the
yeah,
point I
yeah,
was trying to make.
they can't go too far with it,
Yeah, and they
especially
do
when it
have
comes to
they are
media.
beholden to some corporate kind of uh overlords, which
Yeah.
a boss, everyone has a boss, right? So I
Yeah.
guess, you know, but it is disturbing that it's hard to know what is, you know, it's like the other thing about sports journalism is it raises all boats. So like a good team has more reporters than a bad team. Like a LeBron James has sports reporters who are now national sports journalists who are actually making good money being journalists, like Windhorse, because they reported on LeBron James, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it's sort of this intrinsically weird system anyways.
Sports journalism is some of the most accessed journalism in the
Yes.
world.
Yeah,
It
I think that's
so
what
it
I was
leads
looking for.
to weird dynamics.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think sports journalism is getting a little better because I think a lot of these news sources are coming from community funded, like King's Herald
Yeah,
or like The
that's
Athletic.
true. Yeah.
Um, they're a lot less like a lot less news is coming from the big news sites.
I guess
Um,
also, and maybe that helps like some of these, like that the Ricky podcast and the sort of like the citizen groups that have been, I'm Kyle Madsen talks about them. I'm not an A's fan, so I'm not as up on it as other people are, but
yeah,
I know there are some citizen activist groups that are promoting themselves and like have websites set up where you can go check all the paperwork and are doing podcasts and all that kind of stuff to sort of like fight back against the team narrative that's out there, and kind of like exposing like, because I know like the owner just went to Las Vegas and there was like the plans were like not even legitimate. What they were
yeah.
like,
They announced that they were gonna have the plans up in like December,
yeah,
and then they pushed it back up because some event happened with like a police officer death, and they used
uh,
that as an excuse. But they didn't even hire anyone to draw the things yet, so they pushed it until like late February, and then they released the drawings in word form, like they had word descriptions of the arena, and then after that they finally released the renders. But
yeah,
the renders are just another part of this, right?
yeah.
They're all
There was
fake.
something that said that like the renders didn't even have like luxury boxes on them. Like they didn't have
Yeah,
half the stuff that you would need for like a new stadium.
yeah.
Um, and I think I can't remember where I heard the Las Vegas mayor talk about it, but she was like, "This dude is like not dealing in good faith. Like we
Well, I
had a
mean,
site,
the tricky thing about Las Vegas, and this is a very unique thing about Las Vegas, is everything. Las Vegas doesn't really get that much revenue as a city because everything, all the strip, everything people go to Las Vegas for, is in an unincorporated city called Paradise.
yeah,
So
I've been
Las
there,
Vegas's mayor was pissed about the A's because they originally planned to be in Vegas, like the city
right?
proper, but then they moved on to the strip, so in Paradise. So yeah, the Vegas mayor trash talked because of that. But I mean, I don't think I'm not super into baseball either. I'm kind of following it more now because we went through this. I don't want to see another team go through it.
Yeah, yeah.
But the Vegas doesn't seem that interested in it either.
No, I mean, she was like, this guy's a Yahoo. Like he's not even. She was really critical. Like she just said, like their plans are ridiculous. Like they're not realistic, and
Yeah,
they don't seem to have
their
a good.
site is tiny.
Yeah,
It won't fit the stadium they want.
right, right. So, anyways, I mean, it's
Yeah.
heartbreaking and terrible to lose a team, but I also like kind of wonder like what losing the Raiders, for instance, like what was the impact of that? You know, or like
Yeah.
you said, like, is Oracle actually like doing better now that the Warriors are gone? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's not considered like a total team losing your team or anything, but
Yeah.
I mean,
It's just that the Oracle Arena is now the only like stadium in like the Bay Area that doesn't have a sports team, right? So
yeah,
during the season,
yeah,
if any event wants to stay there for more than a few days, right?
yeah.
Then it's way easier to just book it at the Oakland Arena now.
Oh,
And yeah,
Oracle's awesome too. Oracle has that old style
yeah,
top level that's
close to
not
the
like,
fans.
you know, it's not like the grading on Golden One, you know how the top level is like you can barely sit in it. It's so steep.
Yeah,
And
but I'd
Arco,
rather it be steep than like far away.
well, Arco was neither one. It was like closer and it was not as steep. Like
Yeah,
so I don't know how or why they did that in the Golden One footprint, aside from the fact that they were trying to wedge it into that kind of like urban block. Um, but and
I
then
remember them saying the reason was, so you can get closer to the action, right? That's the reason they said that's
yeah,
the
but
reason it's so steep.
it's not a better like the Arco second level was like you could see the floor perfectly.
Yeah.
Golden One, you can't. From the very top row of Golden One in the second row, it's like watching ants.
Yeah, I mean,
And
if you're past like K, you're screwed.
you're screwed. Yeah, exactly. So, anyways, I don't. That's just a personal thing. But also, Arco had that. They had They weren't luxury boxes. They were like some kind of like corporate. I don't
Yeah, they
know,
had the
event
boxes.
boxes or something, and they would have like hot dogs and popcorn and chips or whatever, like crummy food up there. And John's work used to, so they would buy it and like sent you could go with work, right? And it was
Yeah.
$15 or whatever. And it was freaking awesome. Which I'm sure now the luxury boxes at Golden One are way
Yeah,
more
way more expensive.
and
But
way
they
more
had those
fancy.
boxes. I think it was probably. I mean, for Sacramento, I'm a fan of Golden One just because of location, right? You don't have to go all the way
Yeah.
to Natomas. Like,
Yes. Right.
my parents are over in Folsom, so like if I want to go to Natomas, that's like an hour.
Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. But parking sucks. I mean,
There's a lot
Golden,
of parking lots around.
yeah.
A little bit of a walk, but it's
It's
not
just
that bad.
expensive. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or like far. Um, but apparently that is part of what's paying off the debt to
yeah.
have it too. So, um, yeah, I don't know. It really like made me super conflicted. I think I had a lot more, um, I'd never really dug into like the Seattle situation either. And I guess what like their portrayal of the Seahawks, and was there a baseball team too in Seattle?
Mariners. They have the
The
Mariners.
Mariners, right. So of that situation and how they pretty much pulled one over on the taxpayers there made the whole thing about Key Arena make way more sense. Like
Yeah,
I didn't understand why Seattle was like, hell no, we're not building another arena, but we'll remodel this one, right?
yeah,
So, and
yeah.
that was part of why they lost the team, or it was like depicted as part of why they
But Key
lost.
Arena is been renovated. It's
Yeah,
they
yeah,
had public funding going to renovating that arena, and I
yeah.
think it's reassuring. I think this book, the update like was it like 10 years ago, something like that.
I think it's 2008. Let me see. I had it on
But
here.
since then, we've
Yeah.
had a lot of publicly funded stadiums. So
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel for this stuff because I mean everyone wants to copy what was the arena in LA, the football one.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but I don't know. The Rams one.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
what's the SoFi Stadium.
Yeah.
That place is incredible. The amount of money
Right.
that they poured into that. I think teams are kind of realizing now how profitable it can be to own your own stadium.
Yeah.
And I mean, they always knew it, but I guess they're going out of their way to like get their own fancy stadium
Yeah.
and like try to deal with all the pushback from. I think people are
What's
more
the one
aware
that's
about
in
this now.
Santa Clara? That
The Warriors one, Chase.
the
Oh,
no
Santa
the
Clara, no, Levi's.
Levi's, yeah. So that's relatively new too, right?
Levi's is weird.
I
Because they copied the design from the peninsula. So they
oh
originally designed it for the windy, like for the shade and the wind up in the Bay in San Francisco,
right.
and then they dragged that design and put it in Santa Clara.
And then
But
somebody, so I think it was like a year ago or something, it was raining really hard, one of the days when it was raining really hard, and it flooded.
wow,
Like and it's brand new. Like like how can that, you know?
yeah.
But that makes sense if they didn't update it to the location. And
Well, the thing is, it's not a great fan experience if you're not in the luxury boxes.
mm,
So the left half of the arena is super steep. There's not that much seating. There's no upper on the left side of the arena because it's all luxury boxes.
right.
There's a ton of luxury boxes there. The placement is weird because San Jose is weird. San Jose has the airport right smack in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
So there's it's in the way of planes. There's
Wow.
Yeah, the Levi's is not a great stadium.
I haven't heard very nice things said about it. I haven't
Yeah,
heard very nice things said about Chase either. I haven't been to Chase yet. I
I
love
have been to
Oracle.
Chase twice. Um, I went once during the California Classic,
Right.
and I went once during our playoffs. It's
Oh,
very corporate.
cool.
I don't like Chase that much. It's kind of like it's very SoFi esque, where
Right.
like it's because it's all public funded. They poured so much money into that, and it just oozes wealth. It oozes
Yeah.
success, and obviously you go up top, it's not an amazing fan experience.
What I've
Um,
heard from a lot of people is that like it ends. So like you get lost in it because you think it's like going to go around like a normal stadium and you'll get to keep going around, but it stops. So
huh?
like you get stuck in it and you have to turn
You have to
around.
walk all the way around. Wow,
I don't know if that's true or not because
it's very confusing.
yeah,
It's very enclosed. It's very tight.
it's such a weird location. It's right across from the children's hospital. So
Yeah.
I've walked over to it, but I've never been inside it.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, it's
I wonder
crazy.
where the California Classic will be this year.
I think it's supposed to be here. I think.
If it's in LA,
Eek, yuck. And the Clippers don't. I could see it being at the
yeah,
Clippers because they're
into
going to
it.
have a new
Yeah, they're doing
stadium,
the new one.
but they're never in it. So
Yeah, they're
shouldn't.
never in it.
Yeah. Um. So I'm trying to think. Like, I think we've actually like already touched on most of the things I've that struck me about the book.
Yeah,
Um. But there was one other that I'm trying to remember. I really don't think it's necessary to go through like each and every.
yeah,
Like,
because
this
it's
is
a lot of the
really like
same.
every single. I
I
mean,
think
the,
we can
the
talk
luxury
about.
box thing and the fact that corporations can also write those off. So the public has like funded the stadium, right?
Yeah,
And
I
financed the
think.
bonds and then plus the feds are like giving corporations money back for paying for the luxury boxes. So
Yeah,
basically the taxpayers are paying for the fat cats to go to these games. It was kind of insane. And one of the other things I thought that was really interesting that they talked about was this kind of idea of replacement dollars, of like where the money that, like, there's always like this idea that like, oh, all these people are going to come to town to go to the game, right?
But it's
and like
net zero.
yeah, and that just doesn't happen. And in fact, like, the money that's being spent at these arenas is typically an entertainment budget of a family who would spend it in their neighborhood if they didn't spend it at the game, right? So I thought
And
that was
like there was
fascinating.
this talk about how a lot of the stadiums pick isolated areas because they want to avoid the competition, right?
Yes.
So they want all the food to be eaten at the stadium, and so they purposely pick these isolated areas in the suburbs to so all the money can go to them.
I think, and
And
it sort of fed in. I think he talks later about like Fenway um, and and Chicago too, and where there's like, that was part of the charm of going to. Yeah, well, and also just, I mean, they talk in here somewhere about how they talk about like this kind of idea uh, of like Disneyland, right? Where Disneyland is like, has like International Row, and you go there and there's like Little Holland and Little China and whatever it is, right? But it's like they actually destroyed those things in the neighborhood to build that. And it's just completely like, like, even in Golden One, the food court, right? That's just one fucking food company. It's not a Thai restaurant, although I think maybe it might be a little different because if there is an actual like Cafe Bernardo and whatever, but so, and it sort of goes hand in hand with like what they were talking about, how like the part about the ballparks was like so charming when they were talking about how the ballparks were like wedged into these really like irregular lots in the middle of cities, historically, and it was like everyone could walk to them, and it was just a fun thing that a family could do. And they were all irregular size, and they all had some kind of like characteristics that were
that's very
totally.
baseball. One
Yeah.
thing about baseball is there's no regulated size.
Right.
So the outfield is dependent on whatever place it's at, right?
Yeah.
So in when they make these new stadiums, they make it more regular. Is the
Yeah.
whole thing.
Yeah.
There's one of my favorite Twitter accounts is finding high schools like baseball stadiums and mapping them out.
Oh, that's cool.
And seeing all these weird shapes, like how they like sometimes they're like, there's a football field in the middle of their baseball field and stuff like that. Or like how it juts in as like in a right angle because there's a parking lot there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of quirky
I
things
mean,
with baseball.
I think that like, and maybe it's different too, because like Golden One actually like moved into the city from the suburbs, right? So I think you could think of like Arco as being the model that they're talking about in this, even though it wasn't like super fancy or anything, but it was more like that 80s, 90s building that was supposed to have these luxury boxes, and even
Well,
the
but the timing was pretty bad though, right? Because it
yes,
didn't have that. Like
right,
they talked about Miami, they built their stadium, the
yeah,
basketball arena for the Heat, and then the Heat left like 5 years later
yeah,
because because
yeah,
they didn't have enough luxury boxes. And I have to
absolutely
wonder
insanity.
how much of this is just growing pains of sports. And I wonder if this is if field of schemes might just be dead, like this concept of like these teams. I mean, they still try, right? They still try to
Yeah.
get these new stadiums, but the necessity of it is way lower now, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, is it? I mean, I think that's what the A's owner is trying to do, right?
Oh, but the Coliseum was built in the 60s.
Yes, true. But couldn't it be? I mean, I don't actually know. Is there a plan on the table that could make it
They could, but I mean, well, they have that gigantic
renovate
parking
it?
lot, so they
Yeah,
could build right there. I mean,
true.
they're doing that for their soccer team. They're building a
Not just that,
temporary
but they have
arena,
a whole empty
like
football field
gigantic. Yeah,
right next to them
yeah.
that's not being used, right? I
They're
mean,
building a temporary soccer arena in the parking lot for
yeah,
their soccer team.
I didn't really. They do talk in here, which I don't think I notated or anything. They talk about how they talk about the Raiders and how the Raiders' lease was
Yeah.
with Oakland.
Oakland, the Raiders couldn't do anything about the Coliseum because the A's had the arena, and
Oh,
the A's did not want to renovate at the time.
right.
So the Raiders wanted to renovate the Coliseum, but the A's wanted no part in it.
Yeah. I mean, the
Yeah,
A's seem like they're following
the
the kind of
playbook.
like
Yeah,
game plan to a T, right?
yeah, uh-huh.
Like I I have that in here somewhere where it's like insist on, threaten to move. Um,
Give deadlines. Yeah,
yes, like all of those different. And then I think there's even an updated one in the back part of the book.
the San Francisco one blew me away. How the
Yeah,
city refused 4 times to build the new arena, and then it still happened.
yeah. No,
Like
that was
all
just
these
absolutely
deadlines are fake,
mind-boggling.
and with the way the media treats it, you'd never think the deadlines are fake.
Here's the current stadium proposals that are on the blog. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean the other one that really blew me out of the water was well, and like they said specifically in here, you only have to win once, right?
uh-huh.
So like the game is one thing, but this isn't a game. Like you can just fight this fight until you win it, and once you win it, it doesn't matter if you stay in budget. It once it's in, right?
Yeah,
And even like I mean there was several stories like the I think it was the Milwaukee one where it's like the voters voted against it numerous times. It was not going to get approved by the public
yeah,
ever,
mhm,
but the politicians still found a way to make it happen, right?
yeah,
um, and I think same with Seattle, right, where it was never publicly approved technically, but they just rammed it through. And then
yeah,
whatever addendums like and cost overruns and add-ons of infrastructure and all this kind of stuff is just like, I mean, that's where it gets really sneaky, and that's where I think there's been more kind of this idea of like adding on all of the infrastructure costs and passing those on to
yeah,
municipalities, um, and saying that the arena or the stadium or the ballpark is privately funded when in actuality, the preponderance of the cost is in these kind of like accessibility features that
yeah.
the city or the state or have to pay for anyway.
Mhm.
um I don't know when this chart, I should have looked at to find a chart that was like super up to date, but
I mean, that's relatively. It was probably 2018, 2019. That was before the SoFi was built, because they're mentioning both Carson and Inglewood.
yeah, right,
Uh, so that's relatively recent.
yeah.
Um,
The San Diego stuff was insane, like the ticket, um I ticket guarantee or
yeah,
whatever
what
it
the
was,
hell is that? Yeah,
where they're like, "Oh, if you don't sell enough tickets, we'll just reimburse you." And it's like, "Oh, we'll reimburse you for the face value of the tickets, when
There's
if
a
you
lot
didn't
of stuff like that.
like that's insane.
One of my favorite stories of something similar is Chicago. Chicago sold all of their parking lot rights in like a super short-sighted deal. And they have stuff like that. Where like if there's not enough parking, the city has to pay this
Or
like
reimburse.
private reimburse for like what the hell? How did you screw yourselves over that badly? Read
That
your
was
negotiation.
yeah. I mean the Detroit stuff too was just insane. Like they basically took the entirety of downtown
Yeah.
and made it into a parking lot and then built the same shit new like 3 blocks over. Like
Yeah.
just because there was all these like developers involved who were going to make a ton of money off it, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like just absolute insanity.
Yeah. This book, when reading it, like totally gets you down on sports as a concept.
I
It's
mean,
so
I
hard.
still like I
It's
guess
so hard to root, like be positive. I mean, I love sports, but it's
yeah.
so hard to be positive about, as positive about this stuff when teams are just gonna do this shit. All this stuff is made, like a lot of the money is made when teams are sold, right?
Well,
So
I think totally. And I think like but there's this kind of like pervasive myth that owners should also be making money off the team in an operating capacity,
yeah,
right? When it's totally ignoring the fact that their team is generating this massive value uh, increase every single year that they own it, right?
yeah,
Like they're getting like hundreds and hundreds of percentage points against what they originally paid for the teams,
yeah.
and having to make money off it, year to year, um, is kind of fake, anyways. Like,
Well, even if they're making, like, we never know if they're making money year to year. They
yeah,
cook their
right,
books to the point in which they say they're losing money. It might be the most profitable thing in existence, and they'll still find a way to say
yeah.
they're losing money. It's all a scam.
Predictions of economic benefit, in fact, are all over the map, which should come as no surprise given that they all amount to little more than guesswork. Um,
That was surprising to me about how bullshit the estimates are from the teams about
yeah,
costs, both in Detroit and Fenway, and New York, when
yeah,
the teams, when the fans made their own audits about the cost of renovations, it's just so much lower. But all these teams refuse to do renovations because they don't want to be stuck on these old leases.
yeah. And
Like,
I mean, the other thing I think is like the other thing that increases in value in a similar kind of manner is land, right? And
yeah,
these are like land giveaways, basically. I mean,
uh,
so I mean, it's impossible to say what that's worth, you know,
yeah.
unless you're doing it on like a year to year kind of basis. I just, um, the Miami thing was interesting because I think that was such a good like case study of how to like package it as something popular and how to attach like personalities to it. And the next
Yeah.
thing we found from our polls was that Pat Riley was one of the most popular guys around. Riley, the longtime NBA coach and motivational book author whose contract with the Heat gave him part ownership of the team. So they like put him as the face of the project when he had absolutely really nothing to do with it aside from that he was one of the owners, so he is a recipient of the revenue.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just like the sleaziest kind of snake oil sales job,
Yeah.
especially when they're in that case, it was like a whole, it wasn't just the arena, it was like an entire complex that they were, getting publicly funded.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is just incredibly corrupt. I mean, I wonder if there is like responses to this out there that somehow legitimize it or give real numbers or but on the other hand, like this was totally shocking, but at the same time it was like so believable
Yeah.
because I mean, I think and the fact that they like did such a great job of including these different stories that like especially Detroit and beyond, but that have this like historical um tradition of corporate welfare in such a clear kind of and you know case study where you're like, oh yeah, like even I don't know shit about Detroit, but I know that the auto industry completely fucked Detroit over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So it's like just I found it so fascinating. Um And I am interested. I don't know if I'll ever do it, but I did like I said, I downloaded that job scams book too, because I think some of the numbers that they had in this book about the job scams were like, what? Like, I think so. This one, it happens to be right here. Greg Leroy was fond of showing off the business assistance form that had been filed with the state of Minnesota by Dairy Queen seeking $275,515 in state subsidies. Under job creation goals, the company had listed one new job with an hourly wage of $4.50 an hour.
Wild.
It's just like, but I mean, this has actually gotten worse. I mean, and the entirety of Donald Trump's tax plan was essentially this. They took our tax money that we pay and they just gave it away to job creators, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Job creators, I mean, who don't even have to prove that they created anything. Like in
Yeah.
fact, their wealth has skyrocketed.
Mm.
Um it just yeah.
The crazy thing about corporate welfare is I think it was briefly covered, but there's some industries that rely on this. Like they're not profitable any other way. The only way they make
Well,
money is because of the subsidies like that are
yeah.
given because of the government. And
Well, there's an entire market that thrives off of debt, right?
yeah.
So, like, I mean, that's partly why they want to forgive student debt and student loans instead of making schools cheaper, right?
Yeah.
Because there's an entire industry that buys and sells that debt,
Yeah.
right? So they can't destabilize that market. But they did talk about that in here as well. That the bond debt specifically has that maintenance fee, and there are companies that, yeah, are getting massive kickbacks to service that specific debt. And then the HOK, they talk about the HOK architecture firm a
Yeah.
bunch, which who knows if they're still in the business of building all these stadiums, right? But they were sort of the ones that were pushing or that ended up building Comiskey, and that were like all the vogue, all the rage, and doing all the cutting edge stuff in the 90s. So they're obviously like highly
Still
interested.
doing it. They did the Vegas ballpark for the Aviators. They did
Mm,
FC Barcelona's stadium. There's still a bunch.
yeah.
Mercedes Benz, the brand new Falcons stadium.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, Little Caesar Arena, the new
That
Detroit
Detroit?
arena, right?
Yeah. What a mess. The Comiskey stuff was really. I thought the story about how the old Comiskey was built on like a dump,
Yeah.
and some of the members of the group went in there when they were tearing it down. and like started looking at the layers of the soil underneath, and like
Yeah.
I thought that was really sweet and interesting. I mean, some of it is like, okay, like, yeah, maybe the bleacher seats in a lot of these things were, I don't know if that would fly these days, if people would really want to sit on like bleachers or like, but also like the prices of tickets have like, I mean, the Kings tickets, my friend Luke grew up here in Sacramento. He's born here. And when Golden One first opened, I was like, oh, I'm so excited. I'm gonna go see a game in the new arena. And he's like, oh, I'm so bummed. Like, I can't really afford to go to it anymore, And that was before they were even good. That was when tickets were like $30 a game. And now it's like, I don't know. I mean, I bought tickets at the beginning of the year, and there was nothing in the lower bowl that was less than $160 a ticket.
Wow. Well, it's gotten better since. It's pretty close to last year's pricing now.
Oh, really? Yeah. I mean, I think it's come down over the course of the year because they're not.
There was all this hype, right? Like after the playoffs, they jacked the prices, hoping they'd sustain it, and
I heard that
then people didn't buy into it.
the season tickets.
Yeah,
People got like their season ticket renewals, and I heard those are really expensive too.
Yeah, they're like, like people are just talking about like doubling the price.
Yeah. So I mean, what benefit do we get from having a team, right? Like most people root for your home team. I think most people root for a team because it's either geographically where you are or where you're from.
Yeah.
But what benefits do we actually get from it aside from emotional investment, right? I mean, I'm not trying to like, I'm a huge fan, I'm not saying anybody should not fan.
Yeah.
But it
public money shouldn't be going into it.
No, absolutely.
And it doesn't go into it in any other part of the world.
Right. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, they were talking about how this they're trying to pull this stuff in like London.
Yeah.
But for the most part, everything is privately funded outside the US.
I'm curious, like I wish I would have looked up the Toronto Raptors. And there's another team that moved is the Grizzlies, right? They were Vancouver. And I don't know.
Canada deals with the same stuff.
Yeah. So
like Europe, they don't deal with this.
Yeah. It sounded like they were like after all the Montreal stuff, and they were like, fuck this. We're out of this business.
Yeah.
Not doing it. I'm sure we forgot a bunch of stuff. I think the bad neighbor stuff is just like, I mean, all the stuff about like, okay, like in Detroit there was
when they were talking about Boston, about when they were trying to make new plans for the stadium, and like they wanted to, the team pitched it as like evoking the like historic experience and taking these parts from Fenway that are, but you have the real thing there.
Yeah.
There's all this effort into like, they were talking about how what's that, the one in Baltimore, the one that kind of started this all for baseball.
I can't remember all the names.
I can't remember the name. Oh, Camden Field.
Yes.
They were talking about how like Camden Fields invokes this like fake historic, vibe, but they're destroying the real thing to do that. And
I thought it was interesting at the very beginning of the book when they talk about the Cleveland Indians too, how like the Cleveland Indians just sort of became like the ballpark and the team became this sort of like weird symbol of the city and its decline. And so they wanted like a new symbol of, success when the city was actually like, bleeding people, and the schools were in great distress, and but they thought that having like this facelift of like a new venue was going to like show that the city had, was successful, and the economy was booming and all of this stuff, and it just like never really came to fruition.
I think that's so interesting because that doesn't reflect our experience with Golden One. Like the
Yes.
Golden One's a lot better, is a lot nicer than the mall that used to be there. And
Yes.
and
No,
I
that's,
genuinely think that the new stadium actually helped
there's
resurge
also
downtown.
I think there's also some external kind of factors that really weigh into some of this stuff. Like, for instance, the pandemic is one,
Yeah.
but also just the decline in, they talk a lot about when they're talking about building the complexes, like making basically like consumer centers, like,
Yeah.
which is bullshit, right? Like,
Yeah.
no, public money should be used to make libraries and affordable housing and,
Yeah.
whatever, choose whatever you want, making the schools better,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, something for the public benefit, not a corporate.
yeah, and or a third public space, right? That you
Yeah.
don't have to go and spend money at. And there is like a finite amount of money. It's not
Yeah.
like people just have money to spend. And so anyways, I do think that is maybe coming around and um I don't know, the homelessness stuff, I'm not sure. I know it's a hot button issue, but like, how are you going to get people to come to a stadium when there's homeless people sleeping in the doorway of it?
Yeah.
Um, in the most extremely topical kind of sense. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that Golden One, um, has boosted that downtown area and made it more appealing in a lot of ways. Like, I
Mhm.
certainly have been down there a lot more than I was before.
Mhm.
Um, it still has like, if when you walk, I go down there to go to the movie theater down there sometimes
Yeah.
too. Um, was it the Crest? Um,
Esquire. IMAX?
yeah, is it called Esquire? That doesn't
Yeah,
sound
it's called the
right.
Esquire.
But anyways, and it's
That the Esquire is tangent here. The Esquire is really nice. It's one of the only places in the country, in the world, that have the 70 millimeter IMAX.
oh really?
Yeah, like there's like, I think 17 in the country that
Wow.
have IMAX as good as the Esquire.
Yeah.
So if a movie has 70 millimeter, like Oppenheimer does, Dune, 2, if you
Yeah.
go and see it there, it's a treat.
Anyways, I mean, I do think that they tried to do some of this stuff right with Golden
Yeah,
One.
yeah,
Whether it actually, like I said, I mean, there was housing that was attached to the Golden One plan, and I haven't gone back to look at it closely enough to figure out. I did. There was a story, like I said, about how they had to take money out of the general fund to cover these bonds, the bond
yeah,
payments, because they ran short of the revenue streams that were supposed to cover it.
yeah,
So that's money that's coming out of library funds and school funds. And,
yeah,
I mean, there's really no other way to slice it, right? I mean,
yeah,
um, yeah,
yeah. A lot of places. I mean, I think in our case, because we moved it from the suburbs to the city, unlike a lot of the others. I think in
yeah,
our case, it was actually changing, but
yeah,
so many of these aren't, and so
right.
many of these are like, yeah,
Well,
that money would have been way better spent, working on public spaces in the city.
right. And I think uh, Chase as well, like, moved into a more urban setting than it was in. It was in an urban setting, but it moved into a more urban setting, right? Uh,
Yeah, but I think it's weird though, because like accessing Chase isn't any better than accessing Oracle.
I mean, Oracle had parking.
Yeah, and it also had transit right there too.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's a little weird because, like, you can drive up right to it, or you could, take BART if you're in the Bay Area, and that's what a lot of
Right.
people do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I went to, I don't know, Grateful Dead shows at Oracle, and yeah, you would just take the BART. But yeah, I haven't been to, like I said, I haven't been to Chase, so I'm sure that the Muni and stuff is right there.
Yeah,
I don't know if
Muni is
BART
right
is.
there, but
Yeah, but Muni.
it just my point there is it doesn't feel like much of improvement to move in there just because of
No,
how easy it is to get to Oracle.
no. But I think they wanted a bright, shiny,
Yeah,
new,
that's it. They wanted
you know,
the bright shiny, and they had the
yeah.
money.
And they definitely added luxury box space.
Yeah.
And they, I think they wanted it to be closer to the tech bros kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Get the tech companies to pay the expensive tickets.
yes, right, exactly. I don't know. Someone was telling me that they built a bunch of luxury boxes on the ground floor, which
That's a
I don't.
new thing.
Yeah,
The Cardinals are trying to do that.
there's some kind of there's new names too. There's like executive suites and luxury boxes. Like there's different, I think, tiers of these like corporate benefit
Yeah.
accommodations as well now.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the price never matters to the corporates because they
right,
can just write it
exactly.
off,
You can just
right?
write it off. Yeah. So yeah. Um, I feel like we've talked about everything. Let me like
I want to,
blast.
yeah, go through the notes,
I
see
think
if
this
there's
is like the
anything.
very end. The stuff about the guy who um, kept records of all the historical ballparks and stuff was really interesting, and how he would like keep notes on the distances of like the seats to the field,
Yeah.
and that was just anecdotally super interesting. Um,
There was one quote that stuck. I was going through my notes. City's willingness to believe the claims of these stadium boosters, despite all evidence to the contrary, reminds Robert Bate of Pascal's wager. Um, yes, I believe in God because I can't take a chance that there isn't one.
yeah. Uh,
Like they spew all this bullshit, but the politicians, they have to do it. So
it
they buy into it even if it's all
it
bullshit.
really casts aspersions for me on like how good like corporations financials are and stuff too. Like I feel like this is sort of like a secretive kind of.
Well, you can't cook the books that deep for a
Right.
public traded company, right?
Yeah.
You'll get caught eventually.
Yeah, yeah. But I
Like
mean, it really is like an oversight issue. And I guess like I mean the Shohei Ohtani stuff too is it's like you could see how people in LA were like, you're giving that guy that much money and we paid for your
the
home.
LA stuff, Shohei Otani's contract is bullshit though.
Yes.
It's all deferred money, so
Yep.
they're not paying him anything now.
Yeah, and then now there's all this weird kerfuffle about the gambling and the. I mean, I haven't followed it that closely, but it's like, okay, what is going on? Like, this seems like a really
His
weird soap opera.
translator is well. There's an inherent unreliable narrator issue
Yes.
because it's his translator who did all the gambling stuff,
Yeah.
and but he's still translating. He was still translating for them, so no one can trust what Shohei Ohtani has said thus far. But the story keeps on changing, probably because the original story probably wouldn't have saved them from legal liability. That's what a lot of people are believing
Yes.
is
Right.
he probably the most likely scenario that a lot of people are saying thus far is Shohei Ohtani did not cheat, and it was his translator.
Yes.
But Shohei Ohtani originally said he paid for the bailout,
Well, and it
but
sort of
that's
plants the
still
seed
to
of
an illegal
doubt
booker.
out there, right? Like, I mean, I don't know. I don't actually know what's going on. Don't actually care either, but it's just kind of a weird
It's so fascinating.
storyline.
I'm way more invested than I should be.
Yeah, right. So I hear for kicking in some $3 million, Allen got his 300 million plus public contribution in years of luxury box revenue from this new stadium. It
It is
apparently was money
crazy
well spent.
how the Pacific Northwest views him as, you know, this amazing great person. His
Right.
PR is immaculate.
Yeah.
But his PR is a result of this shit.
Well, and I mean, the Pacific Northwest has taken a lot of hits here, I gotta say. I mean, not okay. So, I mean, there's the other thing to consider is that the Blazers they're trying to find someone to buy the Blazers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And basically, I mean, from what I have gathered from this book and what I know about Portland, they will not. They're not going to publicly vote to publicly fund anything. Um, However, I mean, there could be some way that
The city
that they
waves
get
it through,
around
yeah.
it or what have you. And I don't know if that's like a part of the discussion or not, even. But the other thing is that Boeing is someone that they cite in this book as being one of the corporations that's taken the biggest subsidies for job creation.
Yeah.
Um, in addition to, I believe that they've taken land grants, and then obviously you can just go look in like the last month of news about
Yeah.
how fucking shoddy their entire work is, and that's not even touching on any government contracts or anything that they got.
Yeah.
That's just saying like for standard civilian run of the mill work, they have been subsidized to create jobs. They've been subsidized in the form of land to keep campuses, in places, and they are subject to almost zero oversight.
Yeah.
And it's just like it really calls into question what public investment should actually mean at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and I know it can't be ownership in every case, but
Yeah.
it should at least mean some ability to oversee
Yeah.
uh, some of these things. I mean, I think, the progressive argument for public ownership of national teams or of utility companies, for instance, is that the public be the profit sharers, right?
Yeah.
And I know the argument given here is that, like, especially baseball would never open their books to the public.
Yeah.
And I mean, why should they? They have the
Yeah.
sweetest deal you can possibly get here, right? So that obviously wouldn't be on the table anyways. But the progressive argument for why it should be is because the public is putting all this money up and then receiving no benefit for it, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
uh,
nothing will change unless people are aware of the problem, right?
totally, totally.
So especially with public ownership, that'll never happen so long as these teams keep quiet about it.
Yeah,
And they certainly will.
yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, and I mean, it is interesting to know it just as like knowing, like having just read this book and hearing that about the DC stadium and the bonds and that the team can't move. It was just, good knowledge.
Yeah. This
Ah,
stuff is very relevant. It'll keep on coming up.
oh, totally.
Yeah.
Candlestick pork. Oh, that was funny. One quarter is awaiting the construction of one, another is lobbying to get one built, and the final quarter is waiting in the wings for their turn at the plate. Yeah, this one. So this is what I was just looking for. So I think that they've tried to it talks a lot about how they tried to close a lot of these tax loopholes and
Yeah.
make them better, but clawbacks are like, this struck me. Clawbacks are only as good as the will to enforce them. Who the fuck even enforces clawbacks, right? Nobody.
It's never going to happen for a sports team because sports teams are incredibly popular, right?
Right.
Like callbacks can work in other cases. I remember Foxconn. They tried to build that giant factory in Wisconsin, and they're actually pretty successful at clawing that back because the company did nothing, and like so yeah, they're getting their money back because everyone's pissed at that company for not building that factory. But for sports teams, that's never gonna happen. People fighting against like teams. Like, how popular can a politician be for fighting against a sports team?
Yeah, right. Well, and I mean, again, they have all the money behind them to promote them. I mean, again, Sacramento is kind of an interesting case study because Kevin Martin was such a big part of selling the whole arena thing, but he couldn't really save himself from his own questionable history, you know.
Yeah,
but
it's crazy that documentary like was boosting him up so much because of how much he supported this team, but ultimately never came out because of his own scandals, right?
Right. That one other like tax thing that I can't find in here, but that they were talking about was they tried to like close the loopholes and made it like a 10%.
And it made it worse, yeah.
And then they made it way worse. So it's like, it's kind of reminded me a lot of the cap when they were talking about how like they tried to like build this really like rigorous like contract for all the teams and for the salary cap, and then the teams would go and like find the loopholes and they'd be like, oh shit, like that's so smart. Like this, it's like a battle of legality and wills, and like, I mean, this is partially what brinksmanship is. It's just this battle between making the rules and finding the cracks in the rules, right? But there's so much at stake here financially that it makes it really apparent. Let's see. Yeah, that's all I have.
There's two quotes I have here.
Oh, cool.
Hold on. One of them was about Cleveland. Gateway does not represent something new we have. It's rather treating Cleveland the way rich nations treat the world. One Cleveland radio commentator said in the aftermath of the successful drive for a new stadium. Only instead of being dominated by foreign powers, we're dominated by a small group of local people who manage to convince us that we are beneficiaries when they are robbing us. This was about in the journalism chapter about how the way that things are framed. If we framed it like we frame other conflicts, we would all see it in one side. But because it can never be framed that way, we'll never see it that way. Well, most people won't.
Right.
And then another quote I had here is about New York, the Yankee Stadium. Irrespective of its age, inspection confirmed this, finding only superficial damage up to the stadium's concrete facade. These teams do not take care of their stadiums. They have an old one. They're trying to push. They're trying to push it to the brink. They're trying to make these collapse so they can get the new bailout, right?
Exactly.
The Coliseum, it could be a perfect stadium if they renovated it, but instead we're getting stories about rats in the broadcaster's room and leaky, and it's
so
wild.
funny because I think those stories, like when you first hear them or see them on Twitter or whatever, it seems like quaint and funny and like, oh, what a shithole. But then it's like, well, it's a shithole on purpose. Like, this is a totally, intended lack of maintenance that is
Yeah.
causing this.
But that's just a general thing is you can't rely on a public company to do any maintenance
Yeah.
in anything.
Yeah.
Railroads are a great example. The rail trains are in a total our rail infrastructure is in total shambles. And the trains are in a terrible shape largely because companies want to avoid doing maintenance as much as possible.
Right.
And never like it's just something this I never thought of stadiums as like I never would think they wouldn't do maintenance, but then them saying it totally
Yeah.
makes sense.
The New York story about them wanting to take away the park in the Bronx really
Yeah,
hit me. Like that's the ultimate third space, right?
yeah.
Is a park where
There's
people
no
go
spaces
every
like that
day and
anymore.
swing and it's fucking free, you know? It's
Uh-huh.
accessible to every single person in that community
Mm.
and then to build something that somebody's going to charge money for and probably money that the people of that neighborhood could not even afford. But that
Yeah.
was like the perfect symbol of this kind of like complete and total, you know, misuse of rampant overheated capitalism. I mean, that we are living in a dystopic capitalism system at the moment, in my opinion, where everything is, that's why I left Twitter mostly. I left it for other reasons too, but mostly because just the constant, like, you need to pay for shit. And the most important people are the people who paid for shit. And I was like,
Yeah.
fuck that. Like, that is so against what I care about, like
Mhm.
I don't like that, like even this podcast, like there's all these like options to have advertisers and like, get them to promote your podcast. And I was like, no, like I want something to be free. I want to build something that's free because that is what community is, it's not
Yeah.
making people pay for shit. Like, anyways, I know that's a bit of a tangent, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. All right. Are we
Yeah.
done? Do you
I
think?
think we're done. I think
Yeah.
that's it. Like, yeah, there's a lot of quotes we can go through.
Yeah.
I highlighted a lot of stuff, but there's so much.
Honestly, like it was not a difficult read. I think it's difficult subject matter in some places
Yeah.
because it's
I
complicated,
and it
right?
gets dense. I
Yeah.
think the first few chapters are hard,
Yes.
but
I agree.
especially once you get to the newer stuff,
Yeah.
like it was pretty easy sailing
And I
from
would
there.
say like the beginning chapters do such a great job of like setting the stage for
Yeah.
everything that happens down the line. So you
Mhm.
kind of like have the knowledge of like, okay, this team like snuck away in the middle of the night and like made every city scared that their team was going to do this exact same thing, or
Yeah.
like um and that these cities are all competing for the honor of basically paying these owners to be there. Like,
Yeah. Oh, there is one thing we haven't covered. There's no more places for teams to go. Like, right? We have 30 teams. They've already picked the 30 most populated areas.
yeah,
They've already filled out all the spaces in America.
yeah.
And
Well, except for Las
they,
Vegas.
for Las
Las
Vegas.
Vegas is just like the perpetual destination city, right?
But they'll make a new one. They'll make a
Well,
new one.
yeah, and not just that. I think that in some ways, Las Vegas. I mean, seeing what else happened with the Raiders in Las Vegas, not the Aces, but
Yeah.
the Raiders, the way that some of their players have like kind of gone off the rails. I mean, maybe that was bound to happen anywhere. Who
I
knows?
think
But
it's hard to judge because the Raiders are the Raiders.
yeah, right.
Like how much of this would have happened in Oakland?
Yeah, yeah,
The team culture. It feels like that stuff was always happening because
yeah,
of the
maybe so.
Raiders.
Yeah,
Um, but I mean, I, I mean, the Golden Knights don't have that issue, right?
You're right. I don't think so. And the Aces don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder, so they just built like that huge, they built like a huge practice facility in Henderson where the Ignite was playing. And I think
Yeah.
that the Aces share, and now they're shutting down the Ignite. So I
Mhm.
wonder like how they built that facility, if that was a privately funded facility or
Yeah, always interesting.
yeah,
I'm
anyway,
sure some of it was public.
I would bet on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you want to read next? What's it called? I can't
It's
live with
hard
it.
for me to live. It's hard for me to live with me.